All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really foundational, really fascinating. It's attachment theory in psychology.
This should be fun.
Yeah, you sent over a whole bunch of really interesting stuff on this. We're looking at how these early emotional bonds we form, how they kind of take shape, and how they evolve as we go through life.
And they really impact a lot. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how these early relationships kind of set the stage for so much. So our mission today is to really get to the core of attachment theory, figure out what it is, why these early connections matter so much, and hopefully we can do it without, getting too lost in the weeds or jargon.
Yeah, no jargon. We're going to unlock that crucial piece for you, the learner, about relationships. It's a big one. We're going to look at the essentials and why it resonates with us all through our lives.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Go back to the beginning. Let's start with the pioneer of attachment theory, John Bowlby. He was working with emotionally troubled kids in London back in the 1930s. So what was it about his work that really revolutionized how we understand these early bonds?
Well, you see, Bowlby, he realized that the connection between a child and their primary caregiver, it wasn't just about, basic survival, getting fed, staying warm.
Right, not just the bare necessities.
Exactly. He saw this deep, lasting emotional need. It's something that's absolutely vital for healthy development. It goes way beyond just the physical needs.
Uh-huh. So it's more about an emotional connection and emotional bond.
Exactly, precisely. And what's even more fascinating is that, Bowlby's ideas didn't stop at infancy.
Yeah, it's not like we grow out of this need for connection.
Yeah.
Right?
No, absolutely not. He actually emphasized that this drive to form these close attachments, it stays with us. It stays powerful throughout our lives. It's what pushes us to connect with people, seek them out, maintain those close bonds, especially when we're feeling, a bit vulnerable or under pressure.
When times get tough.
Exactly. It's a fundamental way we find security and deal with our emotions.
That resonates, for sure. That instinct to, just want to be near someone you trust when things are rough. It's primal, almost.
Yeah.
But it's not just the child reaching out, is it? I mean, there's got to be some give and take with the caregiver, a response.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. This is where the caregiving system comes in.
Okay.
George and Solomon, they really beautifully describe this. So think of the infant's need for attachment as a signal.
Okay. Like a little beacon going off.
Exactly. The caregiver's job is to respond to that signal, in a way that soothes the infant, makes them feel secure, and eventually kind of dials down that initial distress signal.
So it's almost like a back and forth, a dance.
Precisely. A responsive dance. Baby expresses a need, caregiver fulfills it, everyone feels better, and it creates this beautiful cycle of security and reassurance. And Bowlby himself, he understood this.
Yeah?
He saw this system as a kind of safety net, offering support through, sensitivity, attunement to the infant's needs.
Okay.
When the baby cries, shows they need something, a good caregiver gets it, they respond, and then when the infant feels secure again, the need for that constant closeness, it just naturally chills out.
So in a nutshell, it's about responding in a way that makes the child feel safe and understood. But what are some of the concrete ways caregivers actually do that?
Well, Hazan and Shaver, they outline some key strategies, acknowledging and validating worries.
Right. So not just dismissing their fears.
Exactly. Offering physical comfort, affection, and constantly showing them love and that they're valued.
So those little reassurances go a long way.
They really do. It's about creating this sense of being seen, being heard, and being cared for. And, Feeney's research actually showed something really cool. It showed that this secure base, this foundation of care, it encourages exploration.
So safe haven allows for venturing out.
Exactly. If you know you've got that reliable support, you're more likely to go out and explore the world.
It makes perfect sense. If you know you've got a home base to come back to, you're more comfortable taking risks, being curious. Now, this whole conversation just highlights how crucial these early emotional bonds are.
Oh, they're essential.
Can we dig a little deeper into why they're so foundational for development, for who we become?
Okay, so here's the thing. Responding sensitively and appropriately to a child's needs, it's not just some cultural quirk.
You mean it's more universal?
It seems to be. And attachments, they don't form simply because someone spends a ton of time with a kid.
So it's not just about quantity time?
No. Schaefer and Emerson, they pointed out that the magic ingredient is being sensitively responsive. It's all about the quality of those interactions.
Uh-huh. So it's about being truly present, attuned to what the child is expressing, what they need in that moment.
You got it. And there are two key elements that really make this work. Reciprocity and interactional synchrony.
Okay, those sound like big words. Break those down for us.
Sure. Reciprocity is that back and forth, like a tennis match.
Oh.
Infant signals, caregiver responds, infant reacts, caregiver adjusts. It's this constant give and take.
Got it.
Interactional synchrony takes it up a notch. This is more like a beautifully choreographed dance.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The caregiver's responses, they perfectly match the infant's cues. The timing, the intensity, it's all in sync.
Wow. Like they're reading each other's minds almost.
Almost. These early interactions, when they're synchronized, they're so powerful. They lay the groundwork for trust, shaping a child's expectations for relationships later on.
That makes sense. If your early interactions teach you that your needs will be met, you're more likely to trust others and expect positive responses.
Exactly. And that brings us back to exploration. We talked about it earlier. How does attachment actually fuel a child's curiosity and that drive to explore?
That's a good question. So we've got these little adventures, right? How does attachment play into that?
Well, think of the secure attachment figure as a secure base.
Like home plate.
Exactly. Picture a kid at the park, right? They wander off, explore the jungle gym, but every now and then they glance back, make sure their parent's still there.
To check in?
Exactly. That parent, that's the secure base. It gives the child that sense of safety, that security to explore with confidence. Kids with this kind of secure base, they tend to be more independent, curious, more eager to learn.
That makes intuitive sense. But what about the flip side? What happens when that secure base isn't so stable or even absent?
Bowlby highlighted that without that steady, reliable, secure base, a child's natural inclination to explore, to interact confidently, it can get stifled.
Like they're holding back.
Yeah, and it can have these ripple effects on their development, socially, emotionally, even cognitively. Ainsworth and Wittig, they really hammered home that this secure base function, it depends on the caregiver's consistent responsiveness.
Makes sense. You need to feel like someone's got your back if you're going to go out on a limb.
Right. They even suggested that this whole interplay between attachment and exploration, it's like an inbuilt system, helping us balance our need for safety with that urge to learn and grow.
It's like nature's way of pushing us out of the nest while still making sure we know where home is.
Precisely.
Now, to really observe these different attachment behaviors, Mary Ainsworth came up with this fascinating experiment, the strange situation. Can you give us a quick rundown of how that worked?
Oh, absolutely. The strange situation, it was a stroke of genius, really. It was a way to see how infants react in mildly stressful situations, specifically being separated from and then reunited with their primary caregiver.
So it's all about how they cope with that brief separation.
Exactly. They'd set up this whole scenario with a series of short separations and reunions in an unfamiliar room, and the researchers, they'd observe everything. How much the infant explores, how they react to a stranger, and most importantly, their behavior when reunited with their mom.
That's so interesting. And from these observations, she started to identify different attachment styles. We hear that term thrown around a lot. So in the context of relationships, what do these styles actually represent?
Think of attachment styles as the ingrained patterns we have for relating to others in close relationships.
Like a blueprint for how we connect.
Exactly. And they start forming super early, shaped by those interactions with our primary caregivers. And once established, they become pretty stable, influencing our expectations, behaviors in relationships, even how we parent our own kids.
So they have a long reach.
They really do. Essentially, these styles reflect how confident we are that our attachment figures will be there for us when we need them, whether we trust that they'll provide that comfort and security.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's break down the specific styles. The first one she identified was secure attachment. What does that look like in an infant during the strange situation? And what are the general hallmarks of this style?
Okay, so Bowlby described secure attachment as the ability to connect with others in a healthy way, form trusting bonds, but also be independent when it's appropriate.
So good balance.
Exactly. It's rooted in that belief that you're worthy of love, that people will be there for you. Now, in the strange situation, these securely attached infants, they're cool cucumbers. They explore the room freely when their caregiver's around, might get a little upset when they leave, but they're genuinely happy, easily comforted when their caregiver comes back.
So they weather the storm pretty well.
They do. Ainsworth and her team, they documented all these behaviors in detail.
Amazing. Now let's move on to anxious attachment. It's sometimes called ambivalent or preoccupied. So how does that show up in an infant's behavior in the strange situation?
Okay, so with anxious attachment, things are a bit more, Anxious. These infants, they're often on edge even when mom's there. They freak out when she leaves, and then when she comes back, it's a mixed bag.
Like they're not sure how to react?
Exactly. They might want to be close, but then push her away, maybe get angry, hard to soothe.
Sounds like a roller coaster of emotions.
It is. Ainsworth observed that these infants, they seemed unsure about their mothers, whether they'd be there, whether they'd respond to their needs. And their moms, often their caregiving was inconsistent.
So the infant's kind of on high alert, never quite sure what to expect.
Exactly. And as adults, people with this anxious style, they carry that worry about relationships. They're afraid of rejection, might cling to their partners, trying desperately to hold on.
That insecurity follows them.
It can, unfortunately. They often have a negative view of themselves, but see others in a more positive light.
Interesting. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have avoidant attachment, sometimes called dismissive. What were the key signs of this in the strange situation?
All right, so with avoidant attachment, the infants are like, whatever.
Right.
They show very little interest in their mom when she's there, don't really care when she leaves, and when she comes back, they actively avoid contact.
It's almost like they're shutting down emotionally.
Yeah, Ainsworth interpreted this as a learned response, a way to protect themselves from being rejected by a caregiver who was maybe consistently unavailable or just not comfortable with closeness.
It's just like they've learned to not even bother expressing their needs.
It's sad, but yeah. Mary Main later proposed that this avoidance might be a way for the infant to still maintain some proximity to that rejecting caregiver.
By playing it cool.
Exactly. They downplay their needs so they don't risk being pushed away even further.
A coping mechanism.
Definitely. Now, later on, Mary Main and Judith Solomon, they came up with a fourth category, disorganized attachment.
Ah, yes. This is for infants whose behaviors didn't fit into the other neat boxes.
Exactly. What was some of the indicators of this style?
Well, disorganized attachment is marked by these really contradictory behaviors, like the infant doesn't have a clear strategy for dealing with stress.
So they're all over the place.
Yeah, they might seem confused, even scared of their caregiver. They might make jerky movements, freeze up, or just look totally dazed.
So their behavior is kind of unpredictable. Exactly. They might still try to get comfort from the caregiver sometimes, but there's no consistent pattern. This style often develops when the caregiver's behavior is unpredictable, maybe frightening or abusive. It creates a huge conflict for the infant who instinctively wants comfort from the very person who's also a source of fear.
That's heartbreaking. It's like being caught in a terrible bind.
It is. It's a really tough situation for a child to be in.
Let's switch gears a bit. One of our sources mentions the work of Shaver and Emerson on the development of attachment. They had a very different approach than Ainsworth, right?
Yeah, Shaver and Emerson, they took a more real-life approach. They did this long-term study where moms kept diaries about their infants' reactions in everyday situations.
So less of a controlled experiment, more about observing natural behaviors.
Exactly. They tracked things like stranger anxiety, how the baby reacted to unfamiliar people, and separation anxiety, the distress when separated from the caregiver. Oh, and social referencing.
Social referencing. Remind me what that is.
It's when a baby looks to their caregiver for cues on how to react in new situations. Like, is this scary? Should I be happy? It ties back to that secure base idea we discussed.
Right, using the caregiver as a guide.
Yeah.
So what were the stages of attachment development that Shaver and Emerson identified through these observations?
They outlined 4 key stages. First, there's the asocial phase from birth to about 6 weeks.
The newborn stage.
Exactly. Infants respond pretty equally to different stimuli, whether it's people or objects. Then comes the indiscriminate attachment phase from around 6 weeks to 7 months.
So they're starting to become more social.
Yeah, they start to prefer people over objects, and they recognize familiar adults, but they're still pretty okay with being comforted by anyone. Around 7 months, things change. This is when specific attachment kicks in.
That's when they really start to show a preference for their main caregiver.
Yeah. Exactly. They get really attached to one primary figure, usually mom, and they show separation anxiety when that person leaves. They might also get anxious around strangers. Then, shortly after this specific attachment forms, usually within a month or so, they start to develop multiple attachments.
So they branch out a bit.
Yeah, they start forming bonds with other important people in their lives, like dad, grandparents, siblings. These are often called secondary attachment figures. It's interesting because Bowlby's initial idea of monotropy, where he proposed one main attachment figure, has been modified because of this. Now we recognize a hierarchy of attachments.
So it's not just one person, but rather a web of important relationships.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pause for a moment and recap some of the key things we've learned about attachment theory so far. What are the most important takeaways for our listeners?
All right, so big picture. Attachment is that lasting emotional bond between people, most powerfully seen in that desire to be close, especially when we're feeling stressed or afraid.
Right, that primal need for connection.
Exactly. And it gives us this amazing framework for understanding how parent-child relationships develop and how they affect us throughout life. While that first strong attachment usually happens with the primary caregiver, remember, attachment isn't limited to that one relationship.
We form attachments throughout life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We form them with friends, partners, even sometimes with mentors or other important figures.
Yeah.
It happens through repeated patterns of seeking and receiving care and comfort. Those are our attachment behaviors. And since everyone's different, caregivers naturally vary in how sensitive they are, how they respond to a child's needs, and that's why children develop different attachment styles.
It all comes back to those early interactions.
It really does.
Now, these early attachment styles, they don't just disappear when we grow up, do they? They have a pretty big impact on our adult relationships.
Oh, definitely. Our sources really emphasize that those early patterns of relating, they tend to stick with us, shaping how we approach intimacy and connection as adults. People who had secure attachments in childhood, they often find it easier to be comfortable with both closeness and independence in their relationships.
So they're not afraid of intimacy, but they can also be on their own.
Exactly. And they generally have a positive view of themselves and others. Then there's the folks who developed anxious, preoccupied attachments. They might constantly worry about being rejected, might be clingy in their relationships. This often comes from having a negative self-image, but a positive view of others.
So they value the other person, but doubt their own worth.
You got it. Then you have those with avoidant dismissive attachments. They might prioritize their independence so much that they avoid emotional closeness altogether.
So they keep everyone at arm's length.
Pretty much. And then there are those with disorganized attachments, which often stem from early trauma or inconsistent caregiving. These folks can really struggle with regulating their emotions and forming stable, trusting relationships.
So their early experiences make it difficult to connect securely with others.
Yeah, unfortunately. But it's important to remember that these patterns, while influential, aren't set in stone. Our attachment styles can change over time through new experiences and conscious effort.
So there's hope for growth and change.
Absolutely.
You mentioned trauma, and that brings up the idea of attunement in the caregiver-child relationship. What does attunement really mean in this context, and why is it so crucial for healthy attachment?
Attunement is about the caregiver's ability to really tune into the child's emotional state, understand what they're feeling, and respond in a way that's sensitive and appropriate.
So it's about being emotionally in sync with the child.
Exactly. When a caregiver is constantly missing the mark, misreading the child's needs, or just not responding in a way that's comforting, it can leave the child feeling misunderstood and insecure.
Like their feelings aren't being taken seriously.
Precisely. And this repeated experience of not being seen or understood can really get in the way of developing a secure attachment bond.
It makes sense. We all need to feel like our emotions matter to someone.
Exactly.
We also talked about forming attachments to multiple figures. How does that usually work in a child's developing attachment system?
Well, like we discussed with Shaver and Emerson's stages, infants can actually direct those attachment behaviors seeking closeness, comfort, reassurance to multiple people. They form what you could call a hierarchy of attachments.
Like a network of important connections.
Exactly. Often there's a primary attachment figure at the top, but other caregivers like dads, grandparents, older siblings, they can also become important attachment figures, offering additional support and security. The main goal of the attachment system is always to maintain a bond with an accessible and responsive attachment figure when it's needed. It gets activated when we sense danger, what we call alarm.
Like a built-in alarm system for when we feel threatened.
Yeah, exactly. Then anxiety comes in. That's the fear of losing that important figure. And separation distress is what we feel when that figure isn't available or doesn't respond. And it's fascinating to see how the things we perceive as threats change as we get older. For a little baby, it's all about physical separation from mom. But for older kids and adults, threats can be more about emotional distance, communication breakdowns, or feeling rejected.
So the nature of the threat evolves, but the need for connection remains.
You got it.
Bowlby initially thought there's a strict sensitivity period for attachment formation, that specific window early in life when attachments form most easily. But later research has kind of challenged that idea, hasn't it?
Yeah, those early years are super important for laying the groundwork, but later research has shown that the time frame for forming attachments is more flexible.
So it's not like a door slams shut after a certain age.
No, and the effects of early experiences, they're not necessarily set in stone. Our relationships and experiences throughout life can continue to shape, even reshape, our attachment patterns.
That's good news. It means we're not doomed by our past.
Exactly.
We also briefly discussed the expansion of attachment classifications, going beyond the initial secure, anxious, and avoidant categories. Main and Solomon adding disorganized was a big step. Has there been more research building on that?
Tons. Recognizing disorganized attachment was huge, and researchers have since dug deeper into its roots, especially its connections to early trauma and fear in the caregiving relationship.
So understanding the impact of those early adverse experiences.
Right. And there's been a lot of work on how attachment patterns get passed down through generations, how our own experiences as kids can affect how we attach to our own children.
So it's like a cycle that can repeat itself.
Yeah, but thankfully, understanding it can help us break the cycle. Researchers have also gotten better at observing those subtle behaviors between mothers and infants, even as early as 4 months old, and using that to predict attachment security at 1 year old. And tons of studies have found links between parents' attachment styles and those of their infants, showing how attachment can carry across generations.
It's amazing how much these early experiences can influence us, even down to how we parent.
It's powerful stuff.
Our sources even highlighted some pretty striking outcomes linked to attachment security.
Oh yeah, some of the findings are mind-blowing. Like researchers at Minnesota University found that they could predict with something like 77% accuracy whether a 3-year-old would drop out of high school later on just by looking at the security of their early attachments.
That's incredible, just from observing their relationships at 3 years old.
I know, right? And there's a long-term study from Harvard that found a strong connection between troubled early relationships with mothers and a higher risk of health problems later in life, like heart disease, high blood pressure, even alcoholism.
Wow. So it affects not just our emotional well-being, but our physical health too.
Yeah, exactly. And on the flip side, those who reported having warm, secure relationships with their moms early on had way fewer of these health problems later. It really drives home the point that attachment isn't just about feelings. It has this profound impact on our social, cognitive, and physical well-being throughout our lives.
It's a holistic thing.
It really is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into attachment theory, what would you say is the most essential message for you, the learner, to take away?
I think the core message is that attachment theory provides this incredibly valuable lens for understanding how powerful those early relationships are.
Those early bonds really shape us.
They do. They shape how we connect with others, how we deal with the world, and how we cope with challenges throughout our lives. Understanding these dynamics, it gives you insights into yourself, your relationships, and just your overall well-being.
It's like a roadmap for understanding ourselves and others.
I like that, a roadmap.
And just to recap, the main attachment styles we talked about are secure, anxious, preoccupied, avoidant, dismissive, and the more complex, disorganized attachment. Keeping these in mind can be really helpful when we think about our own relationship patterns.
Definitely. Recognizing those patterns and understanding how they might show up in our adult lives can help us become more self-aware, which is the first step towards building healthier, more fulfilling connections.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to chew on. As you think about the lasting impact of those early attachments, how might understanding your own attachment style shed light on the patterns you see in your current relationships? And how could that understanding help you grow, create even more secure and satisfying connections in the future? It's something worth reflecting on for sure.
Food for thought.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.